September 1st, 1939 arrived with the thunder of artillery and the scream of Stukas, diving toward Polish defensive positions. As dawn broke over the Bzura River Valley, men of the newly formed SS Verfügungstruppe advanced through the morning mist, their black uniforms marking them as something different from the regular Wehrmacht columns streaming eastward. These were Heinrich Himmler's political soldiers, ideological warriors who had spent years training for this moment, yet nothing could have prepared them for what awaited in the Polish countryside. The SS Standarte Deutschland, commanded by SS Oberfuhrer Felix Steiner, crossed into Polish territory with the 10th Army, pushing toward Warsaw alongside seasoned Wehrmacht divisions. Their first engagement came near the town of Błony, where Polish forces had established defensive positions along a tree-lined road. The sound of Polish artillery caught many SS men by surprise. Training grounds in Bavaria had simulated combat, but the reality of incoming shells proved far more terrifying than any exercise. SS Unterscharführer Ernst Weber led his squad through a wheat field when the first rounds landed. The explosions sent dirt and shrapnel skyward, and Weber watched two of his men disappear in a cloud of smoke and flame. The screaming started immediately, not the heroic battle cries depicted in propaganda films, but the raw, primal sounds of wounded men calling for their mothers. Weber froze for a critical second, his carefully memorized tactical training evaporating in the face of actual death. The SS formations, despite their rigorous ideological preparation, quickly discovered that belief in racial superiority provided no protection against bullets. The Polish army, though outgunned and outnumbered, fought with desperate courage. At Pabianishi, SS Totenkopf units encountered Polish cavalry supported by armor, and the engagement devolved into brutal close-quarters combat. Houses became fortresses, streets became killing zones, and the SS men learned that war bore no resemblance to the glorious crusade their leaders had promised. According to historical documentation from the German Federal Military Archives, the SS Verfügungstruppe suffered disproportionately high casualties during the Polish campaign compared to Wehrmacht units in similar situations, largely due to their aggressive tactics and insufficient combined arms coordination. Officers trained primarily in political ideology rather than military science made costly errors in the campaign's opening weeks. SS Hauptsturmführer Karl Ulrich, a company commander in the Deutschland Regiment, recorded in his diary that the advance toward Modlin Fortress became a nightmare of confusion and death. Polish forces, fighting from prepared positions, turned roads into ambush zones. The SS troops, accustomed to parade ground precision, found their rigid formations suicidal under fire. Ulrich noted that within 3 days of combat, his company had lost 30% of its strength, with officer casualties particularly severe as they led from the front in accordance with SS doctrine. The nights brought no respite. Polish forces launched counterattacks under cover of darkness, and the inexperienced SS soldiers often fired wildly at shadows, wasting ammunition and revealing their positions. The lack of combat experience among junior officers became glaringly apparent. Where Wehrmacht units maintained discipline and fire control, SS formations sometimes panicked, with devastating consequences for unit cohesion and effectiveness in subsequent engagements. By September 8, 1939, the SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler had reached the outskirts of Warsaw, a city that would become synonymous with fierce urban combat. SS Obergruppenführer Josef Dietrich, the Leibstandarte's commander, and one of Adolf Hitler's oldest party comrades, confidently predicted the city would fall within days. His prediction would prove catastrophically optimistic, revealing the vast gulf between SS confidence and military reality. The Polish defenders had transformed Warsaw into a fortress. Barricades constructed from overturned trams, furniture, and cobblestones blocked every major thoroughfare. Buildings became interconnected strongpoints, with Polish soldiers moving through knocked-out walls to avoid exposure on the streets. When the Leibstandarte launched its first assault into the Ochota district, they advanced in tight formations, maintaining the parade ground discipline that had impressed Hitler during countless pre-war demonstrations. Polish machine guns opened fire from apartment windows, and the tight SS formations dissolved into chaos. Men scrambled for cover behind anything available: lampposts, fountains, abandoned vehicles. SS Rottenführer Hans Pfeiffer watched his section leader's head explode from a sniper's bullet the man falling mid-sentence as he shouted orders. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical casualties. These were men who had been told they were superior warriors, yet they died as easily as anyone else. The Leibstandart's assault stalled completely by nightfall. Medical stations overflowed with wounded, and the screaming of injured men continued through the night. SS doctors, many with minimal field experience, struggled to perform amputations by lamplight while shells continued to fall. The romantic notion of glorious death in battle evaporated when faced with the reality of gangrenous wounds and morphine shortages. SS Sturmbannführer Hugo Krass, commanding a battalion in the assault, requested permission to withdraw and regroup. His request was denied. Himmler had personally ordered that the Leibstandarte demonstrate SS superiority, and retreat would constitute ideological failure as much as military defeat. Krass's battalion renewed their attack on September 10th, advancing through rubble-strewn streets while Polish forces maintained withering fire from concealed positions. The civilian population complicated operations in ways the SS had not anticipated. Thousands of refugees clogged the streets, fleeing the combat zones. SS training had emphasized ruthlessness toward racial enemies, but the presence of women and children in the battle space created tactical dilemmas. Some officers ordered civilians cleared from firing lines by any means necessary, leading to the first documented instances of SS war crimes during the campaign. Other officers, retaining some measure of military professionalism, attempted to establish civilian corridors, which Polish forces sometimes exploited for tactical advantage. Artillery fire intensified as Wehrmacht forces encircled the city. The Luftwaffe's bombardment added to the destruction, turning entire city blocks into burning ruins. The Leibstandarte pushed forward, fighting house to house through the inferno. SS Unterscharführer Otto Kumm later described the horror of clearing buildings filled with burning furniture, collapsing floors, and Polish soldiers who fought from the ruins until physically overwhelmed. The propaganda image of clean, honorable combat bore no resemblance to the filthy, terrifying reality of urban warfare. By mid-September, exhaustion had become as dangerous an enemy as Polish bullets. Men fought on adrenaline and fear, going days without proper sleep. The SS troops, physically fit but mentally unprepared for sustained combat stress, began showing signs of what would later be recognized as combat fatigue. Officers reported discipline problems, men freezing under fire, others becoming recklessly aggressive, seeking death rather than continuing to endure the psychological pressure. September 20th, 1939 saw Warsaw's organized resistance collapsing under the combined weight of Wehrmacht encirclement and Luftwaffe bombardment. But the SS Verfügungstruppe's education in warfare was far from complete. The units withdrawn from the devastated Polish capital resembled nothing like the pristine formations that had marched eastward 3 weeks earlier. Faces blackened with smoke and grime, uniforms torn and blood-stained, eyes hollow from exhaustion. These men had been transformed by violence into something their training had never anticipated. The casualty figures shocked the SS leadership. The Leibstandarte alone had suffered over 400 casualties, including numerous officers. The Deutschland Regiment reported similar losses, with some companies reduced to half strength. Himmler, reviewing the reports at his headquarters, faced an uncomfortable truth. Ideology could not substitute for military competence, and political indoctrination provided no armor against enemy fire. SS Oberfuhrer Felix Steiner conducted an exhaustive analysis of his regiment's performance, producing a document that would fundamentally reshape SS military training. His findings were damning. The rigid tactical formations emphasized in pre-war training proved suicidal in actual combat. The emphasis on aggressive assault without proper reconnaissance had led to unnecessary casualties. The lack of integration with artillery and air support had left SS units fighting unsupported battles. Most critically, the ideological officer training program had produced leaders who understood racial theory but lacked essential military skills. Junior officers gathered in improvised barracks on the outskirts of Warsaw to discuss the campaign. The conversations revealed profound disillusionment. SS Untersturmführer Walter Schröder, whose platoon had been decimated in the Ochota assault, openly questioned whether the SS Verfügungstruppe served any military purpose beyond providing Hitler with a politically reliable guard force. Such talk would have been unthinkable before the campaign, but combat had stripped away pretense. These men had watched friends die in poorly planned assaults, and no amount of ideological rhetoric could restore faith in a system that had led them into catastrophe. The Wehrmacht regular army officers made no secret of their contempt for the SS formations. General Walter von Reichenau, commanding the 10th Army, submitted a scathing report documenting SS tactical failures. According to documentation preserved in post-war archives, von Reichenau stated that SS units exhibited bravery, but lacked professional military competence, making them unsuitable for frontline service in their current form. The report recommended the SS Verfügungstruppe be relegated to rear area security duties, allowing professional soldiers to conduct actual combat operations. Himmler's response to this criticism would prove decisive for the future of the Waffen SS. Rather than accepting a subordinate role, he authorized a complete reorganization of SS military training. Steiner received authority to implement radical changes, bringing in Wehrmacht instructors and emphasizing tactical flexibility over ideological rigidity. The lesson of Poland was clear. The SS could be racially pure and militarily incompetent, or they could adapt and survive. Pride demanded they choose the latter. The survivors of the Polish campaign spent October 1939 in intensive retraining. Mock battles emphasized small unit tactics, fire and maneuver, and integration with supporting arms. The parade ground discipline that had characterized pre-war SS training gave way to practical fieldcraft. Men learned to move in dispersed formations, to use terrain for cover, to coordinate with artillery observers. Veterans who had survived the Warsaw Inferno became instructors, passing on lessons purchased with blood. Yet even as the SS Verfügungstruppe reformed and retrained, disturbing reports emerged from Poland. SS units assigned to security duties had participated in mass shootings of Polish intellectuals, priests, and Jews. The Einsatzgruppen, special SS task forces, were implementing racial policies with systematic brutality. The distinction between military and ideological functions blurred dangerously. Some combat veterans expressed discomfort with these actions, recognizing that such behavior violated military conventions. Others embraced the brutality, seeing it as the logical extension of the racial ideology that had brought them to the SS in the first place. May 10, 1940, arrived with thunder, not of artillery this time, but of thousands of aircraft engines as the Luftwaffe swept westward toward France and the Low Countries. Fall Gelb, the offensive that would decide Europe's fate, commenced with coordinated attacks across multiple fronts. The SS Verfügungstruppe, rebuilt and retrained after the Polish campaign, prepared to prove they had learned from their bloody introduction to warfare. The Deutschland and Germania regiments advanced into the Netherlands as part of Army Group B, while the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler moved through Luxembourg toward France proper. SS Obergruppenführer Paul Hauser, newly appointed to command the SS Verfügungsdivision, embodied the professionalization of the armed SS. A former Wehrmacht general staff officer, Hauser brought genuine military expertise to supplement SS ideological fervor. His insistence on professional standards had created tension with party purists, but Poland had demonstrated the necessity of his approach. Under Hauser's direction, the SS formations entering the Low Countries possessed competence their predecessors had lacked. The advance through Holland initially proceeded with startling ease. Dutch forces, spread thin and poorly equipped to face Germany's mechanized assault, fell back toward prepared defensive lines. The SS Regiment der Führer encountered their first serious resistance at Roermond, where Dutch troops had fortified the Maas River crossings. The contrast with Poland became immediately apparent. These SS soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, establishing suppressing fire, while assault elements maneuvered for flanking positions. The months of retraining had transformed amateur soldiers into competent combat troops. SS Hauptsturmführer Fritz Vogt, commanding a company in the Deutschland Regiment, led his men across the Maas under covering fire from assault guns. The crossing, though costly, succeeded where similar operations in Poland had failed. Vogt's after-action report credited the improved training regime and better integration with supporting elements. Wehrmacht observers, previously dismissive of SS military capability, began grudgingly acknowledging that these political soldiers had evolved into legitimate combat formations. The Rotterdam assault presented a different challenge entirely. Urban combat, the nightmare of Warsaw, awaited the SS troops once again. This time, however, they approached the task with hard-won knowledge. Small teams infiltrated through drainage systems and building basements rather than advancing in exposed formations. Coordination with artillery observers allowed precision fire that suppressed Dutch strongpoints without the wholesale destruction that had characterized Warsaw. The SS Totenkopfstandarte in particular demonstrated newfound tactical sophistication during the street fighting, yet victory in Holland came at a moral price that foreshadowed darker crimes to come. In the village of Zeeland, Dutch civilians allegedly fired on SS troops from homes displaying white flags. The response proved disproportionate and brutal. SS units burned multiple buildings and executed prisoners in reprisal. Such actions violated established military law, but SS commanders justified the violence as necessary deterrence against Franc-tireur resistance. The incident revealed that professional military training had not eliminated the ideological ruthlessness at the SS core. The advance continued into Belgium, where the SS Verfügungsdivision encountered Belgian troops fighting desperate delaying actions along the Albert Canal. At Fort Eben Emael, SS reconnaissance elements arrived to find Wehrmacht paratroopers had already neutralized the fortress through a daring glider assault. The Leibstandarte pushed past the fortress ruins, racing westward toward France. Speed became paramount. The entire operation depended on reaching the Channel coast before Allied forces could organize an effective defense. SS Sturmbannführer Kurt Meyer, leading a reconnaissance battalion of the Leibstandarte, epitomized the new SS warrior. Meyer combined ideological fanaticism with genuine tactical skill, driving his men forward with relentless aggression. His battalion reached the Aa Canal on May 24th, establishing positions that threatened the British Expeditionary Force's flank. Meyer's radio reports painted an optimistic picture. The British were in disarray, retreating toward Dunkirk in growing confusion. The Leibstandarte seemed poised to deliver a decisive blow that would trap the entire BEF. Then came the halt order, arguably one of World War II's most controversial decisions. Hitler, concerned about committing armor to terrain unsuitable for tanks and possibly seeking to preserve forces for operations against France proper, ordered a pause in the advance. The SS troops, positioned to crush the British forces streaming toward evacuation beaches, remained stationary while their prey escaped. Meyer raged at the decision, convinced that military victory was being sacrificed to political considerations he could not fathom. May 25, 1940 found the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, positioned along the Aa Canal in a state of frustrated anticipation. British forces retreated toward Dunkirk's beaches less than 20 miles away, yet SS troops remained under orders to hold position. SS Obersturmbannführer Wilhelm Mohnke, commanding a battalion forward of the main German positions, watched through field glasses as British columns moved north in growing disorder. Every military instinct demanded immediate attack, but Hitler's halt order remained in effect, and even the fanatically loyal SS could not override the Führer's direct command. The pause allowed British and French forces to establish a defensive perimeter around Dunkirk. When the halt order finally lifted on May 27th, the opportunity for a clean breakthrough had passed. The SS Leibstandarte renewed their advance, encountering fortified positions where previously there had been only retreating columns. Near Wormhout, a small town south of Dunkirk, the Leibstandarte collided with the British 2nd Royal Warwickshire Regiment, defending stubbornly despite hopeless strategic circumstances. The British soldiers, fighting with the desperate courage of men who knew evacuation was their only hope of survival, inflicted shocking casualties on the advancing SS troops. Machine gun fire from brick farmhouses shredded the first assault waves. SS Rottenführer Heinrich Müller watched his squad leader take 3 rounds to the chest, the impacts spinning the man completely around before he collapsed into the mud. The careful tactical lessons of the previous months evaporated in the face of point-blank defensive fire. Men sought cover wherever they could find it, and the advance stalled in confusion and blood. SS Hauptsturmführer Wilhelm Mohnke, ordered his men to bypass the fortified positions and continue toward Dunkirk, but isolated British strongpoints made this impossible. Every farmhouse became a fortress requiring costly reduction. The frustration of SS troops, denied quick victory by the halt order and now bleeding for every yard of ground, built toward an explosion. When British resistance at Wormhout Barn finally collapsed after hours of bitter fighting, the surviving defenders surrendered expecting to be treated as prisoners of war. What followed became one of the Western campaign's darkest episodes. SS troops, enraged by casualties and frustrated by British resistance, herded approximately 90 British prisoners into a barn. SS Oberscharführer Wilhelm Mohnke's men threw grenades into the structure and opened fire on survivors attempting to escape the flames. Soldiers who tried to surrender were shot down. The massacre violated every convention of warfare, yet it occurred in broad daylight with officers present. Some SS men later claimed they were following orders, others admitted they acted from rage and bloodlust. The incident revealed that professional military training had merely provided a veneer over the SS's fundamental nature as ideological killers. Word of the Wormhout massacre spread slowly through Wehrmacht channels. Professional army officers expressed horror at the SS's conduct, but in the intoxication of imminent victory over France, few voices were raised in protest. The British government, still reeling from the disaster of the Continental Campaign, lacked the evidence to immediately publicize the atrocity. The SS Leibstandarte continued operations as though nothing significant had occurred, and the broader German military establishment chose not to investigate too closely into the actions of Hitler's personal guard formation. The evacuation at Dunkirk proceeded despite SS efforts to prevent it. British and French forces held a shrinking perimeter, while the Royal Navy ferried hundreds of thousands of soldiers across the Channel. The Leibstandarte pushed to within artillery range of the beaches, but coordinated Allied defensive fire and the challenging terrain prevented breakthrough. From May 27th through June 4th, SS troops fought a frustrating battle against an enemy who refused to collapse despite tactical defeat. SS Untersturmführer Max Wünsche, serving as an aide to Sepp Dietrich, recorded his commander's frustration during the Dunkirk operation. Dietrich, an old street fighter loyal to Hitler since the 1920s, could not understand why victory remained elusive. The British were beaten, their equipment abandoned, their formations shattered, yet they continued to resist with unexpected effectiveness. The myth of SS invincibility, carefully constructed by propaganda, confronted the reality that determined enemies could still fight back regardless of ideological superiority claims. The fall of Dunkirk's perimeter on June 4th marked a strategic failure, despite tactical German success. Over 300,000 Allied troops had escaped to fight another day. Wehrmacht generals understood the magnitude of the missed opportunity. SS commanders remained fixated on the battles they had won, rather than the strategic victory that had slipped away. The gap in military understanding between the professional army and the ideological SS remained vast, despite the latter's improved tactical performance. June 5, 1940, saw fall rot commence as German forces turned southward toward France's interior. The Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, withdrawn from the Dunkirk sector, raced south through countryside where resistance had evaporated. French forces, demoralized by the Low Countries disaster and the British evacuation, offered sporadic resistance that quickly collapsed under German mechanized assault. The SS troops experienced the intoxication of easy victory, advancing dozens of miles daily through towns abandoned by their defenders. The contrast with Poland's desperate fighting and the stubborn British defense at Dunkirk could not have been more stark. French soldiers surrendered in groups of dozens or hundreds, often without firing a shot. The vaunted Maginot Line, France's massive fortification system, became irrelevant as German forces simply bypassed it, exploiting the fatal gap in the Ardennes that military planners had dismissed as impassable to modern armies. SS Oberführer Felix Steiner's SS Deutschland Regiment advanced toward the Seine encountering minimal opposition, covering distances that would have required weeks of bloody fighting just months earlier in Poland. Yet beneath the surface of easy victory, troubling patterns emerged. French colonial troops, particularly Senegalese and Moroccan soldiers, received brutal treatment when captured by SS units. Racial ideology that branded these men as subhuman intersected with military operations in horrifying ways. Near the village of Le Paradis, the SS Totenkopf Division, commanded by SS Obergruppenführer Theodor Eicke, perpetrated another massacre. British troops of the Royal Norfolk Regiment, defending a farmhouse position, held out against overwhelming odds before finally surrendering with ammunition exhausted. SS Obersturmführer Fritz Knöchlein ordered the approximately 100 British prisoners lined up against a barn wall. Machine guns opened fire, killing most of the prisoners instantly. 2 men miraculously survived, despite multiple wounds, concealing themselves among the bodies until German forces moved on. Their testimony would later help convict Knöchlein of war crimes. But in June 1940, the SS Totenkopf Division simply continued its advance, the massacre an unremarked incident in a campaign characterized by German victory. The pattern of atrocities against black colonial troops intensified as the campaign progressed. SS formations justified the killings as responses to alleged French violations of warfare conventions, specifically claims that colonial troops had mutilated German prisoners. Wehrmacht investigations found little evidence supporting these allegations, but SS commanders were uninterested in objective assessment. The racial ideology they embraced demanded harsh treatment of non-European soldiers, and the chaos of the French collapse provided opportunity to implement ideology without accountability. Paris fell on June 14th, and the SS Leibstandarte entered the city as part of the occupying force. The sight of German troops parading past the Eiffel Tower and down the Champs-Élysées created powerful propaganda imagery. Newsreels showed SS soldiers maintaining discipline in the conquered French capital, the black uniforms and military bearing suggesting both power and restraint. The carefully constructed image bore little resemblance to the reality of SS conduct during the campaign. The advance continued southward as French resistance disintegrated completely. The SS Verfügungsdivision, operating under Hausser's professional command, distinguished itself during the crossing of the Loire River at Sully-sur-Loire. Engineer teams constructed pontoon bridges under sporadic French artillery fire, while infantry battalions established bridgeheads on the southern bank. The operation demonstrated how far SS military competence had advanced since the chaotic Polish campaign. Hausser's emphasis on professional training and combined arms coordination had created units that could execute complex operations with Wehrmacht-level proficiency. France requested an armistice on June 17th, and fighting officially ceased on June 25th. The Western campaign had lasted 6 weeks and resulted in one of history's most complete military defeats. The SS Verfügungstruppe emerged from the campaign with enhanced prestige. They had participated in a stunning victory, and their tactical performance had generally met professional military standards. Wehrmacht skepticism about SS military value diminished, though professional army officers remained concerned about the ideological nature of these formations. The casualty figures told a sobering story nonetheless. Despite the campaign's brevity and France's rapid collapse, the SS Verfügungstruppe had suffered significant losses. The Leibstandarte reported over 300 casualties, the Totenkopf Division even more. The numbers remained far lower than Polish campaign losses, but they demonstrated that even in victory, combat remained dangerous. For every newsreel showing triumphant SS troops, there were field hospitals filled with wounded men and temporary cemeteries, holding those who would never return home. April 6, 1941 brought a new challenge as Germany launched Operation Marita, the invasion of Yugoslavia and Greece. The SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler reorganized and expanded to regimental strength, advanced through Yugoslavia toward Greece as part of General Wilhelm List's 12th Army. The Balkan terrain presented difficulties unlike anything encountered in Poland or France: mountain roads, limited infrastructure, and a population whose hostility to German occupation manifested immediately in guerrilla attacks on supply columns. SS Brigade Führer Josef Dietrich, promoted and commanding the expanded Leibstandarte, approached the Balkan campaign with confidence born from the French victory. His troops had proven themselves militarily competent and ideologically reliable, the combination Hitler valued above all else. The advance through southern Yugoslavia initially proceeded smoothly. with Yugoslav forces disintegrating under Luftwaffe attacks and the coordinated German ground assault. Within days, Yugoslav resistance had fragmented into isolated pockets while the bulk of German forces pushed toward Greece. The Greeks, however, proved far more formidable opponents. Fighting with determination enhanced by mountainous defensive terrain, Greek forces manning the Metaxas line inflicted serious casualties on German units attempting frontal assaults. The Leibstandarte, accustomed to mobile warfare on good roads, struggled with mountain combat requiring different tactics and equipment. SS Sturmbannführer Kurt Meyer, commanding the Leibstandarte's reconnaissance battalion, discovered that aggressive tactics effective on French plains became suicidal in narrow mountain passes swept by Greek machine gun fire. At Klidi Pass, the Leibstandarte encountered the most determined resistance they had faced since Dunkirk. Greek defenders positioned in fortified bunkers carved into mountainsides commanded the only viable route toward Thessaloniki. Multiple SS assaults collapsed under withering defensive fire. Meyer, observing the carnage through field glasses, recognized that frontal assault would bleed his battalion white without achieving breakthrough. He organized a flanking movement through supposedly impassable terrain, his men spending an entire night climbing goat paths to reach positions above the Greek defenses. The dawn assault from unexpected directions broke the Klidi Pass defense, but the cost proved significant. Meyer's battalion suffered over 30 casualties, including several officers killed by Greek sniper fire. The Greek defenders, overwhelmed and surrounded, fought to the last man rather than surrender. Their bodies lay in defensive positions still gripping weapons, testament to courage that impressed even hardened SS veterans. Meyer noted in his report that Greek soldiers fought with a determination exceeding anything he had observed in Poland or France. The advance toward Athens continued through increasingly hostile territory. Greek and British Commonwealth forces conducted a fighting retreat, destroying bridges and infrastructure to slow the German advance. Yugoslav partisan activity intensified in the German rear areas, with supply columns ambushed and isolated German soldiers found murdered. The SS response to partisan activity revealed the brutal nature beneath their military professionalization. SS Hauptsturmführer Gerd Bremer's company, ambushed near the town of Kragujevac, responded by burning the nearest village and executing males of military age. Such reprisals violated military law and basic humanity, yet they occurred with increasing frequency as the Balkan campaign progressed. The SS ideology that classified Slavic peoples as racial inferiors provided justification for brutality that shocked even Wehrmacht officers accustomed to the violence of modern warfare. Reports reached Army Group E headquarters of SS units executing civilians without trial, burning villages suspected of harboring partisans, and treating prisoners of war with systematic cruelty. Wehrmacht commanders, uncomfortable with these actions but unwilling to confront the SS's political protection, filed reports that disappeared into bureaucratic oblivion. Athens fell on April 27th, and British Commonwealth forces evacuated toward Crete. The Leibstandarte received orders to participate in Operation Mercury, the airborne assault on Crete scheduled for May. The prospect of joining an airborne operation intrigued Dietrich, who saw opportunity for the SS to demonstrate versatility beyond conventional ground combat. However, the Leibstandarte's role in Mercury remained limited to follow-on waves, after paratroops had secured initial objectives. When Mercury launched on May 20th, the Leibstandarte waited impatiently for orders to deploy. The Crete operation proved far more costly than planners anticipated. German paratroopers suffered horrendous casualties in the initial assaults, with entire units decimated by Commonwealth and Greek defenders. The Leibstandarte finally landed on May 23rd as part of the reinforcement waves, entering a battle that had already consumed Germany's elite airborne formations. The fighting on Crete demonstrated once again that determined defenders, even those ultimately facing defeat, could inflict crippling casualties on attackers regardless of the latter's training or ideological fervor. June 1, 1941 saw the Balkan campaign concluded with German victory, but the triumph carried disturbing undertones for perceptive observers. The SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler had performed competently in combat, contributing to operations that secured Germany's southern flank before the upcoming Operation Barbarossa. Yet the campaign had also revealed the SS's willingness to commit atrocities that exceeded even the brutal standards of modern warfare. The massacres of civilians, the execution of prisoners, the burning of villages, these actions created hatreds that would haunt German occupation forces for years. SS Standartenführer Kurt Meyer returned from the Balkans with decorations and promotion. His tactical skill during the Klidi Pass operation earning recognition from both SS and Wehrmacht commanders. Meyer embodied the new SS officer, professionally competent yet ideologically committed to Nazi racial ideology. He could competently execute complex military operations while simultaneously viewing conquered populations as subhuman obstacles to German expansion. This combination of professionalism and fanaticism made the SS uniquely dangerous. The Wehrmacht, meanwhile, conducted after-action assessments of the Balkan campaign, and several reports specifically addressed SS conduct. General Wilhelm List's 12th Army headquarters documented numerous incidents of SS troops executing prisoners and civilians without proper military authority. The reports noted that such behavior violated the laws of war and risked creating partisan movements that would require ongoing military resources to suppress. List's staff officers recommended that SS formations be subject to stricter military discipline and that SS commanders who sanctioned war crimes face courts-martial. These recommendations went nowhere. By summer 1941, the SS had become untouchable through Hitler's direct patronage and Himmler's accumulating political power. Wehrmacht officers, even those of general rank, lacked authority to discipline SS personnel. The bifurcated military structure, with Wehrmacht and Waffen SS operating under different command hierarchies, created accountability vacuums that would expand catastrophically as the war continued. Actions that would result in courts-martial for Wehrmacht soldiers went unpunished when committed by SS troops. The SS formations themselves underwent rapid expansion during spring 1941. The original SS Verfügungstruppe regiments expanded into full divisions: Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, Das Reich, Totenkopf, and the newly formed Wiking Division. Additional volunteer formations recruited from occupied territories swelled SS ranks. Himmler's ambition extended beyond mere military expansion. He envisioned the Waffen SS as the nucleus of a future pan-European racial army that would secure German continental dominance. Training for these expanding formations emphasized the lessons learned through 2 years of combat. The parade ground discipline of 1939 had given way to practical field training focused on small unit tactics, combined arms coordination, and aggressive exploitation of tactical success. SS officer candidate schools, while retaining ideological indoctrination, increasingly employed instructors with combat experience. The result was a military force that combined genuine tactical competence with fanatical ideological commitment. A far more dangerous combination than the politically reliable but militarily incompetent force that had invaded Poland. The psychological mechanisms that allowed men like Kumm to reconcile military professionalism with ideological criminality deserve examination. Many SS officers underwent a process of moral compartmentalization, separating their military duties from the broader criminal enterprise they served. They took pride in tactical competence while ignoring or rationalizing the atrocities committed in their units. Others embraced the violence fully, seeing brutality toward racial enemies as fulfillment of National Socialist ideology. A small minority felt internal conflict, but lacked the moral courage to resist, continuing to serve a cause they had begun to doubt. June 22, 1941 arrived with the thunder of the largest military operation in human history. Operation Barbarossa commenced as 3 million German soldiers crossed into the Soviet Union along a front stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler advanced with Army Group South toward Kiev, while Das Reich and Totenkopf divisions drove toward Moscow with Army Group Center. The SS formations entered the Soviet Union as experienced combat units, their ranks filled with veterans who had fought through Poland, France, and the Balkans. Nothing in their experience, however, prepared them for what awaited on the Eastern Front. The scale of combat in the Soviet Union dwarfed anything the SS had previously encountered. Where battles in France had involved thousands of troops fighting over dozens of miles, operations in the Soviet Union engaged hundreds of thousands across fronts, stretching hundreds of miles. The distances alone challenged German logistics. Supply lines stretched taut as mechanized formations advanced faster than horse-drawn supply columns could follow. SS troops found themselves fighting battles of annihilation, while critically short of ammunition, fuel, and food. Soviet resistance also differed fundamentally from what German forces had encountered in the West. Red Army soldiers, when surrounded, often fought to the death rather than surrender. Commissars enforced discipline through summary executions of any soldier who showed weakness. The result was combat of extraordinary brutality on both sides. SS Sturmbannführer Hugo Krass, leading a battalion in the Totenkopf division, reported engagements where surrounded Soviet units fought for days without resupply, continuing resistance even when military logic dictated surrender. The SS formation's ideological indoctrination, previously a concerning factor in their conduct, became catastrophically relevant on the Eastern Front. Nazi propaganda had spent years dehumanizing Slavs and Jews, portraying them as subhuman enemies threatening German civilization. This ideology intersected with military operations in the Soviet Union to create conditions for systematic atrocity on an unprecedented scale. The SS entered the Soviet Union not merely as soldiers, but as ideological warriors committed to a racial war of extermination. Behind the advancing combat formations came the Einsatzgruppen, SS task forces specifically organized to implement the regime's racial policies. These units, though organizationally separate from the Waffen SS combat divisions, drew personnel from the same ideological pool and operated in the same territories. The distinction between military and genocidal operations blurred immediately. Combat SS units provided security for Einsatzgruppen actions, cordoned off villages for massacre operations, and in some cases directly participated in mass shootings of Jews, communists, and other designated enemies. SS Brigade Führer Theodor Eicke, commanding the Totenkopf division, exemplified the intersection of military and ideological functions. Eicke had previously commanded the Dachau concentration camp and had personally murdered SA leader Ernst Röhm during the Night of the Long Knives in 1934. He brought concentration camp brutality to military operations, encouraging his troops to view Soviet soldiers and civilians as vermin, requiring extermination. Under Eicke's command, the Totenkopf division became notorious for executing prisoners and burning villages as standard practice rather than exceptional brutality. The military situation in summer 1941 initially favored German forces. Massive encirclement battles at Minsk, Smolensk, and Kiev trapped hundreds of thousands of Red Army troops. The SS divisions participated in these operations with distinction, their tactical competence and aggressive leadership earning grudging respect from Wehrmacht commanders. The Leibstandarte's breakthrough at Rovno and Das Reich's exploitation toward Yelnya demonstrated that SS formations had evolved into elite combat units capable of decisive battlefield performance, yet victory remained elusive despite tactical success. The Soviet Union's vast spaces and enormous manpower reserves absorbed German advances without collapsing. Where the French campaign had ended in 6 weeks, the Soviet campaign continued through summer into autumn with no end visible. SS casualties mounted steadily, companies reduced to platoon strength, battalions to company strength. The replacement system struggled to keep pace with losses, and veteran NCOs who had survived Poland and France fell to Soviet bullets or artillery. The psychological strain of Eastern Front combat exceeded anything experienced in previous campaigns. The ideological nature of the conflict meant quarter was rarely given or expected. Wounded men left behind during retreats knew they faced torture and execution rather than prisoner of war camps. Soviet partisans operated in German rear areas, ambushing supply columns and assassinating occupation personnel. The SS response to partisan activity consisted of indiscriminate reprisals that created more resistance than they suppressed. SS Hauptsturmführer Max Wünsche, serving on Dietrich's staff, documented the deteriorating situation as summer turned to autumn. The rapid advances of June and July had given way to grinding positional warfare by September. Soviet resistance stiffened as the Red Army learned to counter German tactics, while German units grew exhausted from months of sustained combat. The winter clothing and equipment necessary for operations in Russian winter remained stuck in supply depots hundreds of miles to the rear. victims of the same logistical system that struggled to provide ammunition and fuel. October 1941 brought the autumn rains that turned Russian roads into bottomless mud. The Rasputitsa, as Russians called this season, immobilized German mechanized formations. Tanks bogged down in mud that swallowed vehicles to their turret rings. Supply trucks abandoned when their wheels spun uselessly lined roads throughout the German rear areas. The SS divisions, like all German forces, found themselves fighting on foot with dwindling ammunition supplies against an enemy whose resistance grew fiercer as German supply lines attenuated. The human cost of the Eastern Campaign manifested in casualty lists that shocked SS headquarters. The Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf divisions each reported losses exceeding 50% of their original strength. Officers trained over years of expansion had been killed at rates that could not be sustained. Junior NCOs promoted to fill officer vacancies lacked the experience necessary for their new responsibilities. The elite force that had entered the Soviet Union in June had been bled white by November. Its combat effectiveness maintained only through constant infusions of replacements who arrived at the front with minimal training. December 1, 1941, found the SS division stalled before Moscow, exhausted and freezing in inadequate winter clothing. The great offensive that was supposed to end the war in a single campaign had failed. Soviet counterattacks, launched with fresh divisions transferred from Siberia, pushed German forces back from the Soviet capital. The SS Das Reich division, defending positions near Istra, experienced the terror of facing massed Soviet armor, supported by infantry attacking in waves regardless of casualties. The myth of SS invincibility shattered in the frozen hell west of Moscow. The winter of 1941-42 transformed into a desperate defensive battle as Soviet forces exploited German weakness. The SS divisions, despite catastrophic casualties and impossible conditions, demonstrated the resilience that would characterize their operations throughout the war. They held positions that should have been overrun, conducted counterattacks that temporarily stabilized collapsing fronts, and maintained unit cohesion when lesser formations disintegrated. This performance came at horrific cost. Entire companies ceased to exist, and divisions that had numbered over 15,000 men in June counted fewer than 5,000 effectives by January. The ideological commitment that made the SS dangerous also made them valuable in desperate defensive situations, where Wehrmacht soldiers might surrender or retreat when faced with overwhelming odds. SS troops often fought to the death. This was partly fanaticism, partly fear of Soviet treatment of prisoners, and partly the result of years of indoctrination, emphasizing that retreat was racial betrayal. The result was tactical stubbornness that sometimes provided the margin between German defeat and catastrophe, yet the costs of 2.5 years of nearly continuous combat had fundamentally transformed the Waffen SS. The formations that had struggled through Poland in 1939 bore little resemblance to the divisions frozen before Moscow in 1941. The amateur soldiers had been culled through natural selection, leaving survivors who combined tactical competence with ideological fanaticism. These men would form the nucleus of the expanded Waffen SS that would fight through the remainder of the war, accumulating military achievements alongside monstrous war crimes. The historical record, preserved in archives and documented by historians, including those at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, demonstrates that the Waffen SS participated extensively in criminal operations on the Eastern Front. The distinction between combat operations and genocidal activities remained permeable throughout the war. SS divisions provided personnel for mass shooting operations, cordoned off ghettos during liquidation actions, and directly participated in atrocities that placed them beyond the pale of legitimate military forces. The transformation from political soldiers in 1939 to experienced combat troops by 1941 came at the price of moral degradation that would mark the Waffen SS as a criminal organization. Individual soldiers' tactical competence and physical courage could not redeem participation in a fundamentally criminal enterprise. The battles at Warsaw, Dunkirk, Clyde Pass, and Moscow demonstrated that SS troops could fight effectively when properly trained and led. The massacres at Wormhout, Le Paradis, and countless unnamed villages throughout the occupied territories demonstrated that military professionalization had not eliminated, and in many cases had enhanced, their capacity for systematic atrocity. By December 1941, the Waffen-SS had forged itself through blood and ideology into an elite military force serving a genocidal regime. The men who survived the campaigns from Poland to Moscow carried both combat decorations and moral culpability that no passage of time could erase. They had proven themselves capable warriors, fighting for the most evil cause in modern history, a combination that would resonate through decades of historical analysis and moral debate. The first bloody battles of the Waffen-SS from September 1939 through December 1941 established patterns that would persist throughout the war. Military effectiveness combined with ideological criminality, tactical courage coexisting with moral depravity, individual soldiers capable of both heroism and atrocity. Understanding this duality remains essential for historical comprehension, neither dismissing their military achievements nor allowing those achievements to obscure their criminal nature. The survivors of these first campaigns, those who endured Poland's desperate fighting, France's quick victory, the Balkans' brutal pacification, and Russia's frozen hell, carried forward lessons purchased in blood. They understood that ideology provided no protection against bullets, that even inferior enemies could fight with determination, and that modern warfare consumed men and machines at rates that challenged even Germany's industrial capacity. These veterans would lead the Waffen-SS through the coming years of retreat and defeat, maintaining combat effectiveness even as Germany's strategic position became hopeless. The story of the Waffen-SS's first battles illustrates war's fundamental tragedy, that military effectiveness and moral righteousness are not synonymous, that courage can serve evil as readily as good, and that the same characteristics that make elite soldiers can enable monstrous crimes. The men who fought through these campaigns were neither cartoon villains nor misunderstood patriots, but complex individuals who made terrible choices, serving an even more terrible cause. Their legacy remains a warning about the dangers of ideological militarism and the moral catastrophes that result when military prowess serves genocidal ambitions. The winter of 1941 did not end the Waffen-SS's war, but it concluded their transformation from amateur political soldiers to experienced combat troops. What followed in the next 4 years of war would see them fight desperate defensive battles, conduct last-ditch counteroffensives, and commit crimes that exceeded even their early atrocities. But the foundation was laid in these first campaigns, the tactical lessons learned, the moral boundaries crossed, and the combination of military competence and ideological fanaticism that would characterize the Waffen-SS until Germany's final defeat.